So I decided to replay Donkey Kong 64, which was one of my favorite childhood games. I've revisited it a few times over the years, and goddamn, that game is terrible. It's not a good game. It's very, my clever strategy to survive a hydro pump in this rematch with Lugia failed, and I forgot to turn animations back on. It would have been cool if it had worked. Ha, you sped me up. Use the have water damage berry to survive. And anyway, Lugia's dead now. Good. But yeah, Donkey Kong 64, it's a game that is terrible, that no one understands why it's terrible because I haven't played it like 10 times. It's not bad because, wow, it's a collectathon where there's a lot of things to collect. Isn't that terrible? Isn't it bad because it's a collectathon and there are things to collect? No. No, I like the collecting. I like the gameplay loop of exploring these worlds and picking up items. And I would say Donkey Kong 64 is a very, very flawed game. It has some really good parts to it. I think its level design is excellent for the area. I love running around these big, like pushing the Nintendo 64 to its limit areas, just going on an adventure, like looking for collectibles. That it's not like the argument it's bad because there's so much collecting in it is dumb because that's the genre. It's a collectathon game. And also, it's not actually that big of a game relatively. It's 30 hours of fun levels going around collecting in theory. The problem is, it's not a very good collectathon. Well, actually, the collecting is fine, but like exploring the levels, finding things, like noticing, ooh, there's a puzzle I have to solve with one character. I should go back with this. I love that. I genuinely really enjoy this game. The problem is every single system in the game, every little gameplay mechanic, doesn't work. Nothing in the game works how it's supposed to. You know, like I'll describe this. If you played this game, you'll know this. Like, so in Angry Aztec, there's the first temple, not the llama temple. I guess it's monkey temple. There's like three temples in that, but the temple where you get tiny, and to get tiny, what you do is you walk in with Dizzy, you shoot a switch with your pop guns, then that causes some platforms to come out, and you climb up those platforms, and then at the top there's another switch you hit that makes a big long tongue extend, and you have to walk across the tongue, and that took me like 10 minutes, and that shouldn't take you 10 minutes for something so simple. And the reason it takes you 10 minutes is because you can't walk in a straight line in this game. And that's ridiculous. That's a game like that the controls, just something as basic as walking in a straight line across this tightrope, is basically impossible. And they know it's impossible, which is why they put in so many of... Turn on the hone sound, but I'm not getting any home Pokemon. They know it's practically impossible, which is why it's treated as a challenge in the game. But, like, you can't walk in a straight line because the camera does not function even slightly. It is probably the worst camera in any game I've ever played, and that is saying something. There we go. Right now, I want the puzzle. I'm gonna kill you. Like, the camera is so bad that you cannot walk in a straight line, and this causes problems in other things. For instance, the swimming controls are atrocious, which is why it's kind of bad that they made a whole big water level where you have to swim around a lot. But mostly, actually, Gloomy Galleon isn't that bad because it's big enough and spread out enough, and you don't have to be super precise a lot of the time. But there's one of those barrel mini games, and I have a lot to say about barrel mini games. There's one in it where it's like Splish Splash Salvage or something. You have to swim around and pick up coins, and the camera is atrocious, and the swimming controls are just terrible. You turn so slowly. The only way to move is just by pressing A to shoot forward like 5 feet, and then it's just some of the worst swimming controls ever. Camera makes it horrible, and you have to collect these tiny coin spread in that. And this is a consistent problem. The coins aren't there. They aren't like 3D models that are part of the game. They are like 2D images vaguely tied to where they're supposed to be in space, and they don't rotate with the camera, which fucks with my brain, and I can never get those goddamn coins. I want a Meowth. I want a fucking Plusle. Like, just give me a Plusle so I can name it after a viewer, and then I can read a viewer question. Like, so you're trying to get these coins that aren't actually part of the scene, that don't make sense. Like the hitboxes, I don't know what about them, but they're so bad, and you have to swim precisely, and that doesn't work. And the camera, you can't even see half the coins, and you can't rotate the camera at all. The camera is just terrible. There's a, like later in Fungi Forest, there's the game kind of acknowledging, the controls and the camera are unusable, is Diddy's in the attic of the barn near the mill. Diddy has to just walk around in a dark room and collect coin, or to get to a banana, and it's not even far. It's just that you can't walk in a straight line, and the camera doesn't let you see what you're walking on, and it's abysmal. And another thing, there's just so many minor little annoyances where they decided, let's just make this slightly frustrating. Like, so in that Diddy's barn attic where you have to go around in this dark on these platforms, you have to play your guitar at the start, which takes a few seconds of the cutscene of that, to summon Squawks with a flashlight. And why can't I find a damn Plusle? Let me double check. You have to summon Squawks with a flashlight, and like to light it up, because otherwise you can't see the platforms. Every time you fall off these platforms, which is going to happen constantly, because it's a terrible, terrible mission with barely functioning controls. Yeah, it's 20% chance for Plusle. I don't know why it's not working. Like, every time you fall off, you have to play the guitar again, which just takes a few seconds, and it's just these minor annoyances, like that walking over the tongue bridge to unlock Tiny I talked about a second ago. That resets after every attempt. You have to get your gun out, and you have to shoot it, and also, all the enemies respawn after like 10 seconds, so they'll just attack you while you're just pulling out a gun, because let's have infinitely respawning enemies that do nothing but get in the way and annoy you. They aren't even hard to deal with. It's just that they'll respawn while you're scoped in, and you won't see them, and they'll hit you. Oh god, and there's starfish in Splish Splash Salvage. There are starfish underwater that attack you as you're trying to slowly rotate yourself to be aimed at one of these coins that don't look real, and then they'll knock you off course by hitting you. And I'm focusing on some very basic things, because that's the problem with Donkey Kong 64, that these basic systems don't work. I'm not even talking about fucking Beaver Bother yet, but Beaver Bother is an abomination. It's a terrible. Like, actually, speaking of bad systems, Diddy's flying controls are terrible, which is why it is so frustrating that there are like a bunch of races where you have to fly precisely with them. Like, and the owl race, like, pisses me off, because it's the same thing as the coins. Those rings that don't rotate with the camera, and which, so you can't see what their hit points, where their hitbox is, because it doesn't match up with the image, because the image isn't real. Something about, like, how, it's not just that it's hard to precisely fly around, it's that you can't, and I'm not explaining myself very well. Do you have to reset the Hoenn sound after every single encounter? Like, is that the problem? They have to click on this after every encounter to keep going? Like, this is a clunky bad system. It's not as bad as anything in Donkey Kong 64, but the rings that you have to fly through are terrible, because you can't fly very well at all, and also the hitboxes are made confusing by the fact that they're just 2D images that don't match up with the hitboxes and rotate like so that they're always a circle even if you're like going up to the side of it. It's just terrible. It's terrible. And later in the game, more and more, you're not even finding bananas. Like you go through this trial, and actually now you have to play Beaver Bother, which was not playtested at all. It doesn't work. It's terrible. It's just that's the problem with Donkey Kong 64. It's not that there's so much collection, because that's fun. The collecting is the best. It's where the game shines on level design and character and just ambitious of having these big worlds in what, like 1996 or 1995, something like that. Like the problem isn't that it's a collective fun, it's that every single gameplay system is poorly play tested and doesn't work very well, you know? Like it's a game that has so many different things. It's a game that has combat and shooting and flying around races and platforming. The platforming is abysmal. It's just such a terrible 3D platformer. It is awful to try and do any platform. It's a platformer where you can't platform, is how the game is. And it's not because there's so much things to collect. It's because it's a pain in the ass to collect half of them. It's just an unpolished mess of a game. And also Beaver Bother is terrible, and the rabbit race, and actually the first beetle race I managed to do. It took me like 20 times, but that one I don't actually mind. It's a bit hard, but it's more balanced and works better than a lot of the other races. And that's the problem with Donkey Kong 64. But it's a game that has so much charm and heart and character. I love all the animations and sound effects of the Kongs. I love the design of these areas. I love the fucking dumbass cartoon cutscenes. They go on too long, but between all of the like levels, having K. Rool just yell at his minions and these dumb little skits. It's a game that is good, that I do enjoy. It's just I wish it was better. And also, a problem with how the game is structured, you can skip Beaver Bother, you can skip the owl race and the rabbit race, but you can't, you know? Because the whole point is like, oh, I'm going to collect everything in this big world, which means psychologically the whole point of the game is collecting everything, so you can't not collect something, you know? Because that defeats the point. If you're not going to collect everything in Donkey Kong 64, then why are you playing Donkey Kong 64? It's a game about collecting everything, you know? And that's my rant about a game that is older than I am, that isn't very good, and everything everything I said has been said 1,000 times by different people. So, you know, whatever. Let's do comments, because I caught that plusle, and I named it after Gesture Kitten Cat 1212, 2 comments on the epilogues video. Anyway, now that I've watched the whole thing, it kind of bugs me that it's played like John is being played as an asshole here. John has also gone through an insane amount of trauma, and then is a very real condition, and there is a very real condition that can easily convince you that everyone you know and love is not real and has been replaced with a fake, one that often limits the extent of one's empathy and ability to connect with others, leaving them often seem oblivious or dense on an emotional front from the perspective of others, that often shows up and progresses as one gets older, and which can be triggered by stress and trauma, and often leads one to severely isolate themselves and have rarely but sometimes violent outbursts. What I'm saying is that I take issue with it for the same reason Gamzee is an ableist trope. John hasn't just convinced himself of this, he actually believes it and is experiencing what can only be called a delusion. Source, I have schizospec disorder and know what being delusional looks like from having experienced it. And in John's situation, I can see how one could easily be driven to being delusional because it's made worse by the fact that paranormal and messed up multiverse crap actually does happen around him all the time. For fuck's sake, John is literally detached from reality at one point. Many people who experience psychosis are able to seem normal 90% of the time too. I haven't read Homestuck 2, but I'd be curious if the symptoms of dissociation and delusion are something that recur later for John. So far, they don't. So far, John has gotten over. He's doing better. He's gone over his delusions. He's a lot more mentally healthy, which is good. I like John's where he is as a character. Ooh, that could have been bad if I was stronger because of that. But yeah, that is actually a good point. That John is an asshole because he is mentally ill, kind of. Well, he's an asshole because of how he treats other people. But it is worth pointing out, and that's a fair thing that I hadn't thought of when I did that video, where I am very critical of John and saying that John is like John treating Roxy like an unfeeling NPC. That's a really mean thing to do something. John abandoning his family is a shitty thing. But Gesture King Cat has a point that it's mental illness that is born from trauma, and also it's not unreasonable for John to have these delusions and believe the things that he believes because it's Homestuck. This stuff has happened to him. He believes his family has been replaced. Imagine, if your imagine if, this is a metaphor, if Truman from The Truman Show, a few years after it, thought he was still being watched and everyone was spying on him. And they weren't. He was just free, but he still thought everyone was spying on him. Yes, that's him being mentally ill and delusional, and that's real psychological condition syndromes, but it's also kind of justified because they did do that to him for years. And John's kind of like that. That's a good point, that John is treated like an asshole for being mentally ill. And, that maybe that is kind of ableist. I hadn't thought of it that way. But you have a point, Gesture Kitten Cat. Okay, and the other comment we got here, stop water pulsing me. I just breezed through for so long because I was just going against regular trainers, but now that I'm doing this gym boss rush, they are actually giving me some trouble. I lost my Machamp to Brock last time, and Misty is very tough because my water type counter isn't trained up yet, because grinding in this game is atrocious. It's a terrible game to try and grind in. And other comment from Gesture is obligatory. Also, one of the artists making Hussey's narrative shitpost comics was motherfucking Toby Fox Undertale. But if you're in this comment section, you probably already... Yes, I know that. It still gives me whiplash to this day when I remember The Baby Is You exists. And I say, yeah, it's actually not that shocking. Homestuck and Undertale are very similar. And they respond... Hold on. I personally say they're both metatextual deconstructions of fiction as a concept. But I think they go in very... I would agree with this. They go in very different directions with deconstruction in ways that play off their respective mediums. To claim they're so similar it can't be jarring or make someone smile. Yeah. Dismiss how they both play with their mediums. Hold on, gotta heal up. Gotta use a nice heal. That said, Homestuck is also actively hostile. Sorry, I lost my place. This is tiny text I have on the screen. Just... Homestuck is actively hostile to its reader, while oh, shit. Didn't I heal up this turn? Whatever. While Undertale, by virtue of being a game, reacts to your choices and their senses of humor, while similarly bizarre at times, a lot of Hussey's humor can rely on some level of meanness, which isn't bad. I just find that it's different and has different stuff to say about the topic. The DNA is there, right? But a lot of things that are distinctly Hussian in nature have been toned down in favor of a different approach. I love both approaches. Yeah, Undertale is nicer than Homestuck. Homestuck is a mean comic. It's kind of actively hostile to the reader a lot. On second thought, the meanness or not of the comedy might have more to do with where the internet was when each one was made, but I still contend that Toby's humor stands out separately from Hussey, awesome one shot, who at times carries the energy of a chaos deity that Toby simply does not. But now that was the point of the comic. My point was, it's objectively funny that one of the most acclaimed indie games of all time was made in the basement of the. Oh, I forgot to turn this back on. Like, one of the most acclaimed indie games of all time, made in the basement of the Homestuck guy. That's kind of funny. I agree with that. And also, like, they reference this. I know this. If you don't know, A Baby Is You is like a Homestuck troll fic about Mpreg. I forgot the specifics. But anyway, Toby Fox wrote a song about it as a joke, about this famous Homestuck Mpreg troll fic. And he later sampled that song for the theme he made for a Pokemon game. And it's just ridiculous that there is a Homestuck Mpreg fanfic reference in a Pokemon game. It's absurd and sounds ridiculous out of context. Yeah. And I do argue Undertale is kind of hostile. Like, the whole point of, like, the genocide route, it's basically like, screw you for playing this, you should feel bad. We're turning off all the puzzles because you don't get to play those. You don't get to interact with the NPCs anymore because you're a jerk for wanting to play this. We're going to make every enemy down one hit, except for two, which are going to be random difficulty spike, pain in the ass, you're barely going to beat them bosses, which ended up being the thing that people love, that kind of made Undertale famous. But, like, Undertale is a hostile game. It wants to punish the player for having played the genocide route. And there's a meanness to the design philosophy. And Gesture says, I think that's why Undertale thoroughly lets you earn that hostility and gives you many chances to back out, which Homestuck by its nature can't do. Homestuck doesn't care that what your opinions are. It will hurt you as well as the characters you love, and you're going to have to live with that, which I think really matches with the overall tones of those two games/stories. Hive Swap, my beloved. When shall you return from the war? I need to fucking play Hive Swap eventually. It's very neat how the fact that Homestuck being a comic and Undertale being a game use that lack of freedom of choice to their advantage. I also think that it's cool, while probably unintentional, that the epilogues and Deltarune, they have now swapped those perspectives of freedom and choice and power and perspective, and how they leverage their strengths in that direction to completely disarm the audience as well. Toby and Hussey are mad geniuses or something. I agree. Just, God, Deltarune is so fucking good. It's so fucking good. And these themes and like, the idea of controls over character and what it means to be a character in a story, that starts in Homestuck. That's so much of what Homestuck is about, and also it's so much about what Undertale and especially Deltarune are about. I'm so fucking excited for Deltarune to come back, because I kind of think it's going to come back soon, just based on 2015 we get Undertale, 2018 we get Deltarune Chapter 2, 2021 we get Deltarune Chapter 2, so it's like 3 years, and Toby Fox said soon, and I'm so excited about that, because Deltarune is an absolute masterpiece. Undertale's my favorite game ever made. And also, I'm just rambling. I don't have time to do anything else before I end tonight. Next time we're taking on Sabrina and Erica, and I need to train my Pokemon up because I've lost too much and my team is kind of falling apart. Oh, I forgot to kill you. Goodbye. But something of note, I've been, like, rereading Homestuck fan ending comics is part of planning for next April's video, and something that has struck me is they aren't mean enough. They don't have characters acting like assholes and, like, randomly telling the reader to go fuck themselves, and having, like, a very dark humor where things happen that are bad and that's funny, you know? Homestuck is a very mean comic. It's a comic with a lot of heart and very well written, deep characters and some beautiful emotional moments where they show each other love. And also, it's a mean as hell comic where they treat each other like shit, and the author is constantly just flipping the reader off and saying, go fuck yourself for reading this. And that's a thing that is so integral to Homestuck that is missing of so many of these comics that I've read. Like the Ghost Rider AU, so many people recommend it, and I think it's one of the better Homestuck fan comics. It feels nothing like Homestuck. It lacks so much of that bite and meanness, and it's been a slog. I'm trying to get through Double Death of the Author, and quite frankly, it has been a slog. It's just endless conversations that go on too long of characters apologizing for having treated each other like crap in the original comic. Like, I don't need 4 different conversations of Dirk apologizing to Jake. And yeah, I do think that plot thread could have been resolved better in the original comic, but I also think that Homestuck as a comic was very fond of resolving things through action. Like, it isn't Dave giving a speech, I am over my issues with my brother. It's him hugging Dirk and breaking the unbreakable katana, as I discussed last year, you know? It isn't Terezi having a conversation with Vriska where Vriska's like, actually, you did the right thing by killing me, something Vriska would say. No, it's we seeing these flashbacks of their childhood together and how broken Terezi is for having done this, and then wordlessly running into Vriska and them together as reality crumbles apart, you know? Like, show, not tell, and also be mean as hell about it. Have bad things happen, have characters be mean to each other, have them not just fucking therapy talk, like explain how they've grown as people, have them be flawed and have problems to overcome. And this is just... the video for next April is going to be very hard to write, because I don't want to be too mean, because I'm going to be talking about, like, fucking fans. Like, Andrew Hussey made millions off of Homestuck, and millions of fans. Fuck Hussey. I'll call him an asshole. I'll mock every bad writing choice they ever made, but I don't want to mock, like, the writing or art of, like, fucking Altstuck. Like, this drawn on journal book pages comic by a fan. But also, I do need to point out, this fails to be an ending for Homestuck because it just isn't mean enough. Because it isn't constantly telling the reader to go fuck themselves. And that's so much of the appeal and charm of Homestuck. It sounds bad, like that being told to go fuck yourself as a reader, but it's funny. It's funny when Hussey randomly at the climactic moment just cuts away to Viceroy Bubbles von Salamander and naming 1,000 skeleton minions. That's funny as shit. It's funny when Jay dies, like Wizard of Oz, and then it just shows, like, poorly photoshopped Wizard of Oz screen caps, you know? I'm explaining myself poorly, and we aren't even playing the game. I'm just riding around on a bicycle as I talk this through, but you need the meanness and the hostility because it's so integral to Homestuck's humor, and that darkness and things going wrong and characters being mean to each other, you know, that is what makes them feel realistic. Like, one thing about Homestuck is, like, the characters are terrible to each other. They're homophobic as shit. They're so mean because they're teenagers in 2009, and they grow up and they stop doing that and they be nicer. And, like, I've heard people, like, this is a terrible comic that should never be read because these characters who are closet gay people are homophobic. And, like, the problem is that I think characters having flaws and growing is more interesting than just this sanded off characters not even feeling like themselves. Like, I talked about Crow Strider. That is a problem with Crow Strider. Like, not just that it doesn't capture the voice, because capturing the very specific writing voice of all these characters as Andrew Hussey did, that is hard as shit. I've tried. It is hard to write Homestuck characters. Different comics do that, but, like, Crow Strider, they didn't even do the typing quirks, and just, it doesn't feel like Homestuck even slightly. It's for people who like Homestuck. It's a comic for people who like Homestuck fan art and hate the epilogues because there were actual plot developments and characters acting flawed, you know? I don't like Crow Strider. I think it's a well-written comic, but I genuinely do not enjoy it or think it's very well, and I kind of resent like that I talk about why I love Homestuck so much and uh, how I love it for this meta-ness and for it being bittersweet, and the people like, actually, you should try Double Death of the Author or Crow Strider, which just shaves off those rough edges and drama and cynicism and just makes it kind of boring. You know? I'm not even playing Pokemon. I'm going to bed.